Mr. Chairman, and I just say democracy demands that we oppose the REINS Act. I yield back.
Yes, ma'am. Gentlelady yields back. And Chair recognizes Mr. Roy from Texas. 5 minutes.
I thank the Speaker. I noticed there's been a lot of comments about, this being dangerous. This is dangerous. This empowerment of Article 1 in the Constitution, the People's House and the Senate, it's dangerous to empower Congress. I want to remind the American people that it is your representatives that you hired to come to Washington and represent you that are sitting here in the House Judiciary Committee, a committee charged with defending the Constitution of the United States, that is looking at you and all of this country and saying, we would rather empower the administrative state under Article 2 in the Constitution than do our job to defend the Constitution of the United States as your representative. That is what your representative is saying to you. And they're saying it emphatically. They are saying it with passion. They're not even just ignoring it. They're actually fighting to give more power to the administrative state, more power to the bureaucracy, more power to Article 2. Under a Constitution specifically designed, fought for, to ensure that wouldn't be the case. That gives you a glimpse into the problem that we face today. That an all-powerful government is somehow preferred. That an all-powerful government with bureaucrats unchecked by the people's representatives is the preferred state in the 21st century in America by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. There's been a lot of pointing at the REINS Act as being dangerous and a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth of the calamity that we face with respect to the debt ceiling. I would remind my colleagues and the American people that in the legislation put forward by Republicans, Limit, Save, Grow, that we're fighting to cut the inflationary spending by $1 trillion in year one and $5 trillion over a decade. Our Democratic colleagues want to keep the status quo of record inflation and record spending. We want to cut the spending of the woke federal bureaucracy that's at war with the American people, that is targeting former presidents and targeting the American citizenry, interfering with their ability to live free and prosper economically. We want to limit that simply to pre-COVID levels, something that polls at 76%. Our Democrat colleagues want to expand it. We're fighting for reliable energy and for the working class and hardworking American families, but our Democratic colleagues want to preserve their fat cat subsidies for unreliable energy to the wealthy, to the elite, to corporations and to Chinese communists. 90% of subsidies going to billion-dollar corporations, 80% of EV subsidies going to individuals making over $100,000 or couples making over $300,000. That is your modern Democratic Party, the party of corporate subsidy. We're fighting for the plumber with no student loans and the veteran that sacrificed for the nation. Democrats are bailing out people with master's degree in gender studies. We are fighting for poor and middle-class Americans that are already targeted by the Internal Revenue Service at higher rates. Black Americans 3 times more, poor 5 times more. Democrats want to expand the IRS to go after those Americans even more. We are fighting to reassert Congress's role right here in this committee. We're debating this matter over an executive branch pumping out new regulations that cost hundreds of billions of dollars. Democrats want to empower these faceless bureaucrats. We are fighting to restore the dignity of work in this country. Our Democratic colleagues want to continue to destroy families and communities by spending billions to keep Americans at home. We simply want to restore the work requirements that Bill Clinton signed and Joe Biden voted for, and our colleagues can't even sit down to agree to that which was already accepted previously by our Democratic colleagues. We are fighting to preserve an American dream that is increasingly out of reach for Americans. Our Democratic colleagues want to destroy that dream, and here we debate the REINS Act, designed very specifically to pull back the regulatory state. And I would just add, with respect to the student loan issue, remember that it was Speaker Pelosi who said, people think the President of the United States has the power for debt forgiveness. He does not. He can postpone, he can delay, but he does not have that power. That has to be an act of Congress. And here we are with our Democratic colleagues in the Judiciary Committee yielding that power, not wanting to reclaim that power. I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Klein, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm frankly gobsmacked by the logic being used by the other side to argue that somehow democracy demands that we defeat this legislation, which is designed to empower the people through their elected representatives under Article 1. The idea that somehow by permitting this bill, we would threaten our commitment to clean water or clean air or safe drugs, ensure that benefits that people depend on are delivered on time. The argument essentially is that Congress should not be trusted with determining such things. And in doing so, they argue that the people who elect us should not be empowered to determine such things. Because by passing the REINS Act, you actually do empower Congress. You empower the elected, those who elect the members of Congress to make those decisions. So what does this bill really mean? God forbid it should mean that we're actually here more than 4 days a week. God forbid it should mean that we actually vote on more than a few bills a day. But I'm ready to work, and it may be hard for some members to adjust to on the other side, but I would say that we should do this for the people we represent to ensure that these regulations that are promulgated by a bureaucracy that is unresponsive. The Department of Health and Human Services from 2001 to 2017 issued 2,952 rules. 77% were unconstitutionally issued without a principal agency officer approval. So nobody accountable to the people signed off on these regs. Of the Food and Drug Administration final rules, 98% were invalid. So we've got an unelected, unaccountable bureaucracy issuing thousands and thousands of rules, and the American people are unrepresented. So
would the gentleman yield for a question?
This legislation is important for that purpose, and for those who were upset about the bill that was passed by this body to actually address the debt limit, you may not have liked the bill, but you can't deny that this body passed the bill. In fact, this is the only body that passed a bill, and you also can't deny that none of you voted for it. So the crisis that is occurring belongs completely, the crisis blame belongs at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue and the other end of the hallway in the Senate for their failure to put forward any kind of proposal that could pass muster in the Senate. And with that, I'm happy to yield to the gentleman for a question.
In your view, why is this bill constitutional under the Supreme Court principles enunciated in Chadha?
The bill is constitutional because it retains those powers which were delegated to the administrative agencies in the first place. It's within Congress's authority to take back those powers which were delegated. So I see no problem with the constitutionality of it, and I'm happy to yield to the gentleman from Arizona for his comments as well.
Yeah, thanks so much. So in Chadha, you had a kind of a bizarre situation where a bill was taken up in Judiciary Committee, but not ever taken up. I shouldn't say it was referred to, but it was removed from Judiciary and was taken to the floor for a vote. Now, what Chadha turned on was that particular piece of legislation actually was removing a regulation that had already been put in place, and it was doing so without bicameralism, without presentment. What this bill does is completely different. It effectively blocks a regulation from becoming effective. That's very, very different than taking regulation that's there and without bicameralism and without presentment, then stepping in. That's why this bill, it doesn't even fall under charter because just the process that we've had here. This does not allow a single house. It requires the bicameralism, and it actually kind of, in a way, presumes that regulation doesn't take effect until we approve it. That's why the language of the approval is actually set forth in the REINS Act itself. I'll yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired, and Chair recognizes Mr. Liu, California, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The arrogance that I've heard from some members across the aisle is astounding. Let me just put it out to you this way. Do you want members of Congress to decide if a particular drug cures pneumonia? I mean, I know we're like all that. No one here has any idea. You want the experts and doctors of the FDA to do that, right? Do you want members of Congress to determine if certain brake systems on cars work or not? I mean, I know we're all that, but we have no idea about that. You want people at the National Highway Transportation Safety Agency to look at that. Do you want members of Congress to determine if a particular airplane is worthy for flight in commercial airspace? I know members across the aisle think we're really smart and we should be doing all this stuff. Or do you want the experts at the FAA who know what they're doing to look at this? Let's go back to reality here. We're in a modern world. There are lots of things members of Congress simply do not know. We don't have the expertise. We rely on federal agencies, and they do a pretty damn good job. I yield back.
Would the gentleman yield? Would the gentleman yield?
The gentleman
yield, Mr. Liu?
yielded back.
Well, I did yield back, but if I could reclaim that, I'll give it back to you.
All right, I'll let you do it this time.
Thank you. I'll yield to Mr. Johnson.
Well, the chairman,
I yield to the chairman.
Thank you. I've been meaning to ask this question of the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massey. He indicted, in effect, the Congressional Review Act and said it was useless. Would the gentleman be interested in helping repeal it?
No, I said it's inoperable for about 98% of regulations.
So would you be interested in repealing such an inoperable
No, I'd like
law?
to amend it with the REINS Act.
Okay. I yield back to the gentleman.
Would the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Yes, we talk about Congress taking over the rulemaking apparatus of the federal agencies so that we can bring it back to the people who've elected us so that they can have an impact on the regulations, which they already do, by the way, through the notice and comment period associated with promulgation of rules. But once a rule has been put in place, then the agencies hear from consumers, they hear from stakeholders, they hear from businesses, they hear from other governmental agencies seeking to be in compliance or asking questions about a particular rule. Do my friends on the other side of the aisle think that their offices are set up to address the many phone calls and inquiries that are coming in from all of the stakeholders about a rule that Congress might promulgate? Do we actually think that the legislative branch has the capacity to administer a rule? I mean, that's nonsense. Come on, people, let's wake up. This is about defunding the federal government. This is about putting in place an apparatus where every man is for himself, every woman is for herself, and by the way, women are not equal to men in that kind of a society. There's no protection for women, no protection for babies, no protection for our anyone's health, safety, and well-being. It's just open season by the corporations and the wealthy. That's what my Republican friends are advocating for with this, this change. Is one step in that process. And we've gone too far. It's time for America to wake up and realize that government is of, by, and for the people. It's us, including the people who man those agencies. Those are our relatives, those are our friends, those are our neighbors. We're working for the common good, not just for the sake of wealthy corporations and wealthy individuals. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Van Drew, is recognized.
You know, I almost can't believe I'm hearing this, so I'm gonna, as best I can, in the way that I do, try to straighten this out a little bit. This has nothing to do with thinking that women are inferior. In fact, quite frankly, this bill has nothing to do with a responsible debt ceiling. But what folks on the other side are doing, again, as they continue to do, is let the American people who are watching this on TV look at the shiny object over here, because we don't want them to see what the real deal is. I've served at every level of government. I've been a mayor, I've been a councilman, I've been a county commissioner, I've been a state legislator in the Senate and the House. And let me tell you, I talk to a lot of people. If there's anything I do in life, is I get out in the street and I talk to people. And there aren't a lot of people who think, boy, the regulatory process is great. You know, dentists and doctors aren't saying, I love the way that they're regulating me because it's really helping patients, because it isn't. Small businesses aren't feeling that way. People who are trying to work in the workaday world, who work for other companies, aren't feeling that way. And my friend, Mr. Johnson, he talks about the big corporations. They're able to deal with it because they're big, they're powerful, they have a lot of money, so they can deal with this excessive regulation. We do have a responsibility in Congress. We're not going to be administering every minor issue that comes along and have an administrative branch in each and one of our congressional offices. What we are saying is something that other people call sometimes legislative intent. I don't know how many times I've seen a bill passed in Congress. I've seen a bill passed in the House of the House in literally the state of New Jersey or any state, and it doesn't represent what the people want, and it doesn't represent what the legislators want. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the way it works. We work hard. We go out. We talk to people. They tell us we need to do something. We pass a law, and then you need to have an appropriate action with that law, not the stuff that we're doing now where we literally just go forward, pass a law, and then whatever a particular regulatory group wants to do may be very different than the law we passed, very different than what the people want. And people also mentioned that, we were talking about the responsible debt ceiling and talking about our bill, and somehow that got brought into this. I don't know how. Let me just say that Republicans believe that women are totally equal. I don't know how that got brought into this. I don't know how this bill would hurt women. I don't know how it would hurt babies, the ones trying to protect babies. And you know what people want? When you talk about a debt ceiling, damn it, do you know what people want? They want us to stop spending. They want a responsible debt ceiling. They want our government to control itself. They don't want it to waste money. And when it does spend, they want it to spend on things that protect the American public and that protect our American country. But we go astray. I hear things that are so far astray. That's not what this bill does, the things that you're saying. It doesn't do any of those things. What it does is make sure that literally the laws that we pass in the country we have reflect the values of the people who live and work in this great United States. And they reflect those values through their Congress. And if their congressman or congresswoman isn't doing that, they lose the damn election. They lose the election. And then we move on. That's the way we work. But not some, high-end regulatory group that doesn't have to listen to everybody, that tells you how to live your life, how to legislate, how to do every part of the government and how it should function. That is not how it was meant to be. That is not what we want. It is not what the American people want. And if anybody wants to go out and walk the streets with me and talk to some folks and ask them if they want more regulation, do they believe we have too much regulation? They will all tell you that we do and that they're tired of it. It doesn't mean we don't need some regulation. But no, I want to finish this up. I'm sorry. But you know what? The bottom line is regulation is obviously a necessity, but good government and listening to the people of America is why we are here. It isn't to have regulatory agencies run our lives and do things to us that we never intended and don't want. So we do have a voice in it. This is America. People have a voice, and we have a voice. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Buck.
I thank the chair. Mr. Roy, I wanted to visit with you about a few of the comments you made earlier, if you're willing to engage with me.
Yes, sir.
I'm wondering, do you know approximately in the last few Congresses that we have served together, how many bills passed by suspension?
Well, I don't know the number, but it is a large number.
In the hundreds?
Hundreds, yeah, hundreds of bills by suspension.
And other than our friend from Kentucky, most of the people in the House vote for those bills that passed by suspension.
I might have the second most number of no's to my friend from Kentucky, but it was pretty high. And by the way, we objected to a lot of that in order to protect the American people.
Right, and make sure that we had the time to read those bills before we voted for those bills. But if there was a common sense regulation that was passed by the administration that cost more than $100 million, would it be fair to say that that bill could be brought under suspension fairly quickly, passed, and we would have the result where Congress, Article I Congress, saw that and certainly a drug that's going to save lives?
It's certainly possible to do that under the rules.
And isn't it true, or let me just ask you, I won't do a leading question, but when the Magna Carta was signed, did it require the Parliament to yield to the king, or did it require the king to yield to the Parliament?
It was fairly revolutionary in the transformation.
And isn't our Constitution based on that same concept?
It is.
And isn't Article I of our Constitution dealing with legislative power because our founders believed that Article I was the most important article in the Constitution?
Absolutely.
And aren't we on a hill overlooking the executive branch because we are supposed to be overlooking the functions of the executive branch? Isn't that the plan that they came up with to make sure that the visual was there, that the White House is lower geographically than Congress, the White House looks up to Congress, and there is a mall that people can gather on and petition Congress. You can't walk into the White House and get through security. You can walk into your member's office, knock on the door, and ask to speak to your member. You can't go to the Supreme Court and ask to speak to a Supreme Court justice. You can in this Congress. We are accessible as opposed to the administration. And isn't that what the REINS Act is all about, is asking people, bureaucrats, to understand that we're responsible. We've got the power of the purse. We're responsible to the people, and they should come to us if they have a need for an expensive regulation.
Yeah, the gentleman from Colorado is correct, and that is what is so extraordinary about how my colleagues on the other side of the aisle just seem to just whisk away the whole purpose of a republic. The whole reason that we have a republic where we're supposed to represent our constituents and do so in such a way that we are restraining a burdensome, powerful, and potentially tyrannical executive branch. It was literally why our system was created, and all we're trying to do here, and by the way, it was supported on a bipartisan basis in previous years. This passed on a bipartisan basis in 2017. Only now do our colleagues believe somehow standing up for Article I over Article II is going to be dangerous, in their words.
And is this REINS Act, does it apply equally to a Republican administration and a Democrat administration?
It does and should.
And are there subcommittees set up in the House so that subcommittees could hear these very important, very expensive regulations and make recommendations to the body?
Absolutely. And by the way, to the arguments of saying there's all these experts over the administrative state, I would posit that that's part of the problem. But if they're going to bring their expertise, they can present that in summary form and say, here's why this regulation is necessary, and we can make a decision in subcommittees or committees as to whether or not it's worth $100 million and doesn't step on the rights of our citizens or doesn't spend money that we don't have. We can do that.
And my friends on the other side of the aisle keep talking about a democracy, and you keep talking about a republic. Could you tell me the difference, please?
Well, and it seems like that is completely lost in this town, that we created a republic on purpose so that those of us who represent our constituents can come here and make decisions that we think is beneficial for the republic, and keep in mind the laws, keep in mind the Constitution, and make those decisions as representatives of the people, not through the direct decisions made by the people. I would make one note on that point. I had to go through that decision-making in January of 2021, as did you, and make a decision that I had to then go explain to the people of my district why I made a choice, because that's how this works in a republic.
You want to yield?
Yes.
I'll yield to the gentleman from Louisiana.
In 6 seconds, democracy is two wolves and a lamb deciding what's for dinner. The founders were